So that leads me to Elliot. Elliot is currently working as a consultant conducting threatened species surveys in Queensland, and his research interests include climate change, adaptation in insects, biodiversity. Now, I first met Elliot at Woodford Folk Festival when I went on one of his early morning bird walks. His early morning bird walks are absolutely extraordinary. What I learned from that experience was not just to watch birds, but to listen to birds. And I learned that there's far more going on in the environment than I had ever imagined. So I asked Elliot if he would be willing to come and talk to you about that and hopefully open all our eyes and most importantly, our ears to the environment around us. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'll pass over to Elliot. Thank you, Elliot, so much for being here so early in the morning. Off you go.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. So yeah, as Sarah said, I've been involved with the folk festival for not quite as long, but quite a few years now. I think I first went when I was 10 or 11, and I'm 33 now, so getting up there. And it's a yearly tradition. And recently I've been doing the bird walks in the mornings, which a friend of mine, Roy, used to do. But I've taken it over now, and I think it's a really good opportunity to get people who might not know as much about the environment, just to know a little bit more. So, for example, the whipbird call, which Sarah tried to play before, I'll play it to you on my phone. Actually, that's probably the easiest way.
That's awesome idea. Well done.
It's if you live in Australia, it's one of the most common bird calls that you'll hear because it's very loud, and they occur basically everywhere apart from the driest deserts. So can you guys hear that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it has this really constant tone and then like the whip crack, and the two parts of the call are actually sung, I should say. It's the song, the breeding song, and the two parts of the song are coming from two different birds. The first part of the song comes from a male who's doing that constant, and then the whip crack actually comes from the female, who's responding to her mate in their territory, usually. But some funny things can happen. So young males, if they haven't got a female in their territory yet, they can sometimes pretend that they do, and they'll mimic the female. And yeah, it gets a bit silly from time to time. But the majority of the time, if you hear that whip crack call, it's coming from two birds. So there's things like that I try to, teach people or introduce people to, because I think the more that people understand about the natural environment, the more people care about the natural environment, and the more willing they will be to alter their behavior to try and protect it, which is pretty important to me. But this kind of community outreach type stuff, for want of a better word, I've only been doing for maybe the last 5 or so years. Prior to that, I was working as a researcher at a university, and I did a PhD on rainforest birds. So that experience has kind of provided the backdrop for everything now that I talk about. And while I won't go too deeply into the scientific kind of stats and stuff during this talk, I thought it'd be nice to give you guys a window into that kind of world, because unless you're an academic yourself, not many people get to see into that kind of space and learn what it's about, unless you're reading papers and going to conferences and things like that. So for this talk, I've kind of crammed together a couple of my old talks. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy it. If anyone's got any questions, I'm sure there'll be some time for questions at the end. But yeah, I'll just run through these, and then I'll try. I've got a song, or a soundscape rather, in my recording as well. at the end, which I wanted to listen to, but since Sarah's didn't work before, I've just sent the file through in the meeting chat. So if it doesn't work, everyone can just open it on their computers and listen to it at the end, if you want to. It's just rainforest birds.
Sounds great. Well done.
But yeah, so why did I choose my research topic for my PhD? So basically for my PhD, I wanted to look at why rainforest birds occurred where they did, what environmental factors shaped their distributions and where they occurred. And the broader context of that research was that, you know, even back then, a long time before that as well, we knew that the climate was changing rapidly and that this was going to have serious implications for humans and wildlife. I've just ripped this slide out of the latest version of the IPCC's synthesis report. So this is a massive collaborative report that happens every 5 years. Basically, all the climate scientists, biologists working on climate change, whatever, everyone gets together, have a look at the data that's come out from the last 5 years. They crunch the numbers and then they issue this report so people can basically get a synthesis of all the climate change research that's happened in the past 5 years. And sadly, they're progressively more and more grim and confronting reading, because despite all the, you know, media stuff talking about it, government's commitments, not much is really happening on a broad scale yet, and it really needs to. So this is the first conclusion from the abstract, and I'll just read it out to you, which is a bit annoying. Sorry for that, but if people can't see the text, it might be helpful. So human activities, principally through the emissions of greenhouse gases, have unequivocally caused global warming, with global surface temperature reaching 1.1 degrees Celsius above the 1850 to 1900 level in 2011 to 2020. And the global greenhouse gas emissions have continued to increase. So what does that mean? How will climate change affect ecosystems? I think it's probably the most important question in ecology, and potentially for everything else as well. But it's a very difficult question to answer because it's a question on a global scale. There are so many competing drivers, so many different things happening, that it's really difficult to disentangle what's going on. So I'm obviously interested in birds. Back then, I was primarily interested in rainforest birds, and these communities are going to be hit pretty hard by climate change in the future. And I was wondering, what's the best way that we could monitor these communities? And what do we know already? So the species, this has been demonstrated before in multiple taxonomic groups, so not just birds, but insects, trees even. Species are starting to move upwards in elevation or away from the equator towards the poles to track their preferred climatic zones, or envelopes, they're often called. And why are they doing this? Because they've evolved for a very long time to live in harmony with their environment. And as the environment changes, they want to stay in the area that they like. So what this looks like in practice is animals moving upwards on mountain ranges or making latitudinal shifts. But what I was really interested in was what happens when animals reach the end of their adaptive movements. So this bird, for example, that's just gone up the mountain range, he's on the top of the mountain range now. There's no more mountain range above him. There's no more habitat above him. He might not have the capacity to move long distance to go south. And so what happens? He starts to get a bit hot. And eventually, species like this are going to be at serious risk of extinction. And it's not just birds. Like I said before, this is basically across the board for every taxonomic group. There's research on this already, and there's a lot of research on this these days. As you can see from this figure, actually figuring out what is going on is really complex because not every species responds as we expect. Species in different environments respond in different ways. And so finding a way to monitor these movements or these changes in distribution long term would be really valuable. And that's what I was interested in. But to do this in a traditional way, which means, you know, essentially a person going out into the field to count birds, to record what they see and then report on it, or a team of people, this is very difficult for a number of reasons. Like primarily in Australia, there's really high diversity, which means people can be kind of overwhelmed by what's going on. I'm sure some people on my bird walks feel like that when I'm just firing off what's calling, you know, everywhere. So until you've got over that initial hurdle of difficulty, it's very difficult to do it. Not everyone has the same skill level, and that might not be due to intelligence, although sometimes it is. It can be just due to the ability to hear some birds. So some birds are beyond the range of hearing for people over 50, for example. There's a lack of people that are highly trained. There's really high associated costs if you have really good people doing these surveys, blah, blah, blah. So it's quite difficult to resource a biodiversity survey with those constraints, particularly in remote areas or areas that are, you know, large areas of forest where there's no access. And particularly when you think about covering, you know, the entire east coast of Australia, for example, or doing monitoring over a period of years, like to do it in a traditional way becomes very, very difficult and not cost effective. But thankfully, the machines are here to save us again. So we've got these little units that we can put out in the forest. This is kind of a sequence of the oldest to the newest ones. And what these do, basically you can program them to record bird song in whatever kind of protocol you want. And you can leave them out in the field for a long period of time. And this is what I was doing during my PhD. So people have been using these, I mean, basically since, you know, cassette tapes were able to be waterproofed and put out in the forest. So, you know, late 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And people have used them for all different reasons. So they're good for finding really rare species because they can be out there for ages. You can identify individual animals within a population in some circumstances because of their unique calls. You can do behavioral studies, so you can figure out, you know, what time the breeding season starts, for example. You can monitor migration. All of these kind of broad scale questions that are difficult to resolve using traditional methods become easier when you use acoustic monitoring. You also create a permanent record of the birds that were there at the time. So at the end of this talk, we'll listen to my recording that I made 10 years ago. And if I go back to that recording, you know, I can listen to it and figure out what species were at that site, at that time of day, at that time of year, in that spot 10 years ago. And of course, I can do the same thing by looking at my handwritten notes. But if you're thinking about collecting a year of data, it's difficult to envisage going through that, at least in a cost-effective manner down the track. Another big benefit for me was the minimization of disturbance. So these units are small, they're camouflaged, they're just on a tree. The birds presumably don't even know that they're there. So they behave in a completely natural way, which they often don't when there's an observer in the field with them. It's easy to put them out, it's easy to sample, and you get this big increase in how much ground you can cover and the amount of time you can cover. So just to sum all that up, the traditional methods are really labor intensive, and the acoustic monitoring is relatively cheap and easy. But where was I going to do my research? So I chose to use an elevational gradient. I won't go too much into this, but the gradient works well because you can use the change in elevation as a proxy for changing environmental conditions. So most people have experienced this. If you go up to Lamington National Park or something, some mountain national park, it's often cooler up the top of the mountain than it is down in the valley, obviously, because the temperature declines with altitude. So you can use that as a bit of a proxy of future change. And I was obsessed with birds then, and their calls are relatively well known. So it's a good group to target with acoustic monitoring. And then I wanted to make a survey of the biodiversity in the park where I was doing my research. I wanted to try and capture this migratory component of the community, see if I could detect breeding events, and then more broadly kind of try and understand what was going on and what was driving the community composition to see how that might change in the future. So I'll skip over this stuff. The red star on the map on the left is where I did my research. So it's the Gondwana Rainforest World Heritage Area in Australia, Lamington National Park and Border Ranges National Park, which straddle the Queensland-New South Wales border. And it's basically subtropical rainforest, never been logged. It's primary forest and it's in really good condition, generally speaking. So that's where I chose to go. And I had a grid of sites going from the lowlands to the highlands. I had one of my recording units placed within each elevational band during each month of my research. And then I would go back and listen to the recordings and identify what was in them. So this is the main problem with acoustic monitoring. I ended up with data from roughly a year. So when I took out all the rainy days and whatnot, I ended up with data from roughly a full year at each elevational band. I wasn't recording for the full day, just 10 minutes a day, but still that gave me 300 hours of recordings to go through, which ended up being 12 and a half 24-hour days of recordings, which I listened to in my lab at uni, which was quite challenging by the end. And yeah, so I recorded about 14 months of data, kind of give and take those days that were affected by weather. This occurred basically 10 years ago now. And from that data set, I got 72 species of birds. And this is getting a bit technical, but it shows some really interesting patterns. So the graph on the left of the screen is called an ordination plot. And basically what it does is look at variables in multiple dimensions from the bird community, the temperature, the time of day, the time of year, and it squashes all of these variables which are occurring in kind of a multivariate space. It squashes it into 2D space and shows you what each variable contributes to that graph. So you can see these inverted triangles on the left. Those represent my sites at 200 meters. This open squares represent the sites at 400 meters. The closed squares are 600. The diamonds are 800. The circles are 1,000 meters. And then the high elevation sites, the ones at the top of the mountain, are 1,200 meters. So you can see in this graph, based on everything, the community at 1,200 meters at the top of the mountain is much different to the community at the bottom of the mountain, which is what we'd expect. But what does this mean in the climate change context? It means that the community at the top of the mountain is in trouble because the primary driver of the pattern in this graph is temperature. So as the climate warms, the communities at the mid elevations are going to start moving up the mountain, and they're going to become more and more similar as the temperature range, the difference in the temperature range gets squashed by the increasing temperature. Now, these are some more results. So this is talking about two species of birds, which are migratory songbirds, black-faced monarch and spectacled monarch. I could see in the acoustic data exactly when they left. So the black-faced monarch left in early March and started coming back in mid-September. But the spectacled monarch left in early March and came back slightly earlier at the end of August. So there might be some ecological driver for this. They might not be able to compete as well with black-faced monarchs, so they get back to the breeding grounds earlier. This is just an example of the kind of patterns that you can tease out of this data. I was able to examine in quite good detail the breeding behavior of these two species, which are incredibly similar. So there's two different species in the pictures on this slide, which look almost identical, and they behave almost identically. They're very difficult to tell apart in the field, but thankfully they have very different songs. So the russet-tailed thrush has this really distinctive two-note whistle, which is in the top slide in the sonogram. So this just represents the acoustic space visually, and I'll whistle their call. They kind of go like that. So you can see the initial part of the whistle here, do, 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 and then this descending call. But the Bassian thrush, in contrast, has a really kind of like variable stuff like this, which is much lower frequency, and you can see that in the graphs as well. So because the calls are so distinctive, I could pull them out and start graphing up when they were breeding, because they typically only sing during the breeding season. And what I could see was that the russet-tailed thrush, the peak in their singing activity, which probably coincides with breeding activity, was in August, but the Bassian thrush peak in breeding activity was in October. Now, this is interesting because there's been this long-standing kind of trope in the bird guides and in birders' knowledge in Australia as well, that Bassian thrush is only at the top of mountains, russet-tailed thrush is only at the bottom. And so this difference in breeding behavior makes sense when you think about it from that context, because at the top of the mountain, it's colder for a longer period of time. And so the Bassian thrush probably starts breeding later because the insects aren't as active until later in the year. But no one had demonstrated that before, and I could do that really nicely with my acoustic data. We could also see the number of detections plotted against elevation for both species. So that pattern seems to hold. Russet-tailed thrush occur up to about 700 meters, and then really don't occur above that, or at least not very frequently at all. And then Bassian thrush is the reverse. So they're most common at the top of the mountains, and then as you go down the mountain, they just drop out completely. So these two species, which have diverged only recently in evolutionary time, segregate themselves in the same habitat by elevation and by time of year in which they breed. And then this is kind of the end of the story from that data set anyway. What is the primary driver of the change in distribution? I kind of mentioned this before, but temperature overrides everything. So the hot sites down the bottom of the mountain, so the 300 and 500 meter site, they're grouped out on this ordination plot really nicely. The mid-elevation sites, although there is some overlap with some of the high ones, the 900 ones up here are overlapping with one of the 1100 meter sites. In general, the mid-elevation sites group out in the middle, as you'd expect. And then at the top of the mountain, the cold sites are probably the community that we need to be most interested in from a climate change mitigation perspective, because as I showed right at the start, the species that are stuck there often won't be able to move south. And as the climate warms, their habitat is going to become smaller and smaller in extent. And the conditions that they've evolved to deal with over millions of years are no longer going to be present. So extinction risk is very high in these high altitude endemics. And widening the scope a bit, this is really apparent in the wet tropics. So up in Cairns, the tropical highlands, there are a bunch of mammals, possums, and other interesting things that live up there right at the top of the mountains. and they're basically, excuse my French, they're buggered if we don't make pretty dramatic interventions to help them. Yeah. But, oh, I meant to put another slide in here, sorry. So I'll go back and talk about what's happening since I finished my PhD. So I was lucky in that I was a bit of an early adopter of this technology. I had quite a few papers that have been really well received out of my thesis, which was great for me. But since that time, what's happened? So there have been large projects in Australia and overseas that have used what they call acoustic observatories. They've basically got a bunch of these units, similar to the ones that I used during my PhD, but most of theirs are powered by little solar panels on top of the unit. Most of them have a little 5G chip in them so they can send the data remotely. And they're basically hoovering up massive amounts of acoustic data across Australia. So that project is called the Australian Acoustic Observatory, I think. There are similar projects overseas. And because of the problem of massive data sets and not being able to go through them, like it would be impossible to go through that as a person and tease out any patterns. They're using artificial neural networks and AI, so-called AI for want of a better word, to look into that data more deeply and monitor the long-term trends. Now, most of these projects, I think, haven't published their results yet, but those papers should be coming out soon. So if you're interested in that topic, keep an eye out and search for the Australian Acoustic Observatory. Hopefully they're going to be publishing some results soon and we can see what's going on. But taking a step back from the scientific part of it, learning to listen to birds and use that data is potentially the most effective, cost-effective way and the best way to monitor these broad-scale environmental changes that we expect to occur as the climate continues to warm. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. I don't know if it's exactly what Sarah expected when she asked me to give the talk, but
no, it's fabulous. It's even better.
Okay. It's been what I've been interested in for my PhD and ever since. And although I'm not super active in this research space anymore, if you're interested in that stuff, there's a website called ResearchGate where I have an account. You can search my name on that. You can read all the papers that came out of my PhD. Same thing on a website called Google Scholar. You can find all of them if you're interested. And then I also have a website, a blog where I very infrequently, like maybe once every 2 or 3 months, write something, but that's not bird specific. It's just everything natural history related and what I think about things. So check that out if you want. And then I'll see if this works.
It works.
Sarah, give me a wave if it's not playing the sound. Okay. If it doesn't play the sound, you can go to the meeting chat and just double click on that little file that I sent. It's just a music file. It should play in whatever music player you've got, but we'll see if this works first. It goes for about 2 minutes. This is a recording from my favorite site from my PhD at a place called Bar Mountain, which is right up the top of the mountain. It's cloud forest, a stunted forest where the canopy is only about 10 to 12 meters high, always foggy, full of mist, full of lyrebirds. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy the recording. And then after that, I can answer
then we'll go for questions, yeah.
So I'll just make sure this thing is turned up and see if it works. You guys hear it or not? I can hear it, but
yes.
Yeah.
You can hear it?
Yeah.
Cool. So that weird gurgling call is the lyrebird.
What's that one, Elliot?
Which one?
The louder one there.
The high pitch thing?
Oh, I don't know how to describe it very well. Never mind. If it comes again, I'll point it out.
Yeah. I'm writing down the species to tell you at the end.
Oh, good. That one.
This guy, it's Albert's lyrebird.
That was the lyrebird. Okay.
So from that recording, I'm semi rusty and it's hard just off the computer speaker too. It'd be better with headphones, but I got Albert's lyrebird, rose robin, brown cuckoo dove, golden whistler, eastern yellow robin, Lewin's honeyeater, pale yellow robin, Bassian thrush, and right at the end, shining bronze cuckoo. So 9 species from that 2-minute recording. I'd probably, if I use my headphones, I think there might be like another 5 or 6 in there, but yeah, that gives you a taste of what I was doing.
See, that's just totally incredible for me, because the fact that you can actually identify that many birds from that is extraordinary. So how do we get to learn even a snippet of what you know?
Okay, so I think the most important thing is to spend time in the field, obviously. When I was learning bird calls, there were really no resources available beyond like a series of CDs that Birds Queensland made. But now there's some fantastic apps that you can get on your phone that have all the bird calls of Australia, basically, and subspecies and variation and everything. So there's an app called Stewart Sounds, and there's another one called, what's the other one? Ozbirds. Both of them have call libraries in them. But I think if you're not a birder already, the most important thing is, to basically go out into the forest, listen to stuff and try and find things when they're calling, because then you have a visual association with the song or the call that you can hear. Now, it's almost like learning a new language, right?
Yeah.
So it does take time, it does take work, and you'll find as you get better at your local area, you might go somewhere else and just be completely.
Because every time I go for a walk with you, I try and learn 1 or 2 more, you know.
Yeah. So there's some really distinctive things that are good places to start. So like Lewin's honeyeater, for example, basically occurs up the entire East Coast, sounds like a machine gun. That's the first bird that I learned the call of.
I can do the Lewins now.
So it's just practice, really.
Stop sharing, and we can go on to asking you all sorts of questions to see your face more. I'm sure there's heaps.
Okay. Far away.
Who wants to start with a question?
Elliot, does it help to know your own hearing range?
I mean, yes and no. I would say yes, because if you go out with someone, a bit younger or whatever, with a bit better hearing, and they're like, I can hear this thing, why can't you hear it? You can be like, well, I can't hear that frequency. But most of the time, I don't think it really matters. The only time it would make a massive difference is if you're in the desert and you're looking for grass wrens, which are an Australian endemic family of birds. Oh, sorry, they're a subfamily. They're related, really closely related to the fairy wrens. They're basically like desert fairy wrens
Yeah,
on
I know what they are.
steroids,
Yeah.
big boys. But their calls are extremely high frequency, and often older people can't hear them at all. So if you can't hear above, I don't know, like maybe 50 kilohertz or something, you've got Buckley's of hearing grass wrens in the field. So
I'm not likely.
I mean,
It's just at home, if I have my hearing aids in,
Yeah.
like I can hear so much more.
yeah,
But they sound different to when I don't have them in.
yeah. That's probably just because, I mean, the hearing aids are designed to amplify human speech primarily,
Yeah.
which is quite low frequency. A lot of bird calls and songs are higher frequency than that. But yeah, I mean, it's all relative, right? Like if you get used to the bird song in your hearing aid, like it's a philosophical question. Does it sound the same to you as it sounds
That's what I
the
was
same to
wondering,
me?
because
It doesn't matter.
sometimes I forget I've got, half the time I haven't got them in, but
Yeah.
when I have got them in, I think, oh my God, what's going on out there? And I rush outside thinking something's happening. You know?
Yeah.
That's a cool question. We've got a question from David, and he's made a comment that there are some relatively cheap acoustic recorders available commercially, and are they worth investing in? But to answer that question, I want to show you one that he's probably talking about. So,
Audio moth.
looking at this, have you seen this one?
Oh yeah. I've seen this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This might be something that David, you're considering buying. What do you think about these things?
I haven't used this device. I remember seeing it. I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months ago now, when we were looking at potentially getting some for a survey that we were doing. I think that they're based in the US.
US, but they do map all the bird calls globally.
Okay, yeah. So
I'm wondering if it's a citizen science sort of a project, and they're collecting this for scientific research, or whether it's just,
I don't know. I don't think so. And while it might be fun to use, I don't know how reliable the identifications that come from it would be.
Okay, I'm going into their map, for instance, if we go into the research area here. It's, I mean, for someone who's not a scientist, this looks like an enormous amount of potential data.
Yeah, it does. I don't want to poo-poo the idea at all. I mean, it's cool. You can get a little recording and it'll tell you some stuff in there. But just like looking at that list of stuff that it's identified there, it's basically all the common and loud birds.
Okay.
So like bell miner, really distinctive call. Taresian crow, super distinctive, super loud. Noisy miner, everywhere, loud. Rainbow lorikeet, the same. Scaly breasted, the same.
So it's sort of like a beginner's step then.
Yeah, it could be. And another thing I should have mentioned before, if you want to kind of trim down if you get a bird guide for Australia and you look at Eastern Australia, you're looking at 600 to 700 species, right? That's pretty daunting if you're thinking, oh no, I've got to learn the calls of 600 species before I know what's going on. But in your local area, what I would suggest is having a look at the eBird website, which should give you a much smaller range of birds, in your local forest or parks, right? Maybe 50.
So eBird, you'd suggest, would be a must-have.
Yeah, I think it's very valuable. There's an app you can use on your phone, which will tell you what birds are kind of expected in the area with frequencies and everything. You can look at the website and plan trips and whatever. There's a whole back end now which is the Macaulay Library, which has things like people's recordings of birdsong. It has photographs, everything. So it's handy. But going back to the question, like, would it be valuable to get one of these devices? I mean, sure. If you want to take recordings of the birds, in your backyard or whatever, why not? I would just be cautious with what
Would it
it tells
actually
you.
hear a coxswain big parrot? That's a specific question, David.
What was that?
David's wondering if it would hear a coxswain fig parrot.
Well, presumably it would if they're still extant, which I am very skeptical of. So for people in the call who might not know what this is, it's a subspecies of a fig parrot, a tiny little parrot about this big, which has been critically endangered or endangered for the last 40 years. The latest sightings, verified sightings that I'm aware of, are in the late 70s. There haven't been any well-documented sightings since, in my opinion. Other people might have different opinions, but
do we know what caused that decline?
The loss of lowland rainforest habitat. So that was a real lowland rainforest specialist in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, where it used to occur. Something like 98% of that habitat is gone. So it's just habitat loss, basically. Now there is a remote possibility that they're hanging on somewhere, but I personally really, really doubt that. I think they've been extinct for decades, probably.
Yeah.
But interestingly, I reached out to the recovery team when I finished my PhD. I said, hey, I've got a full year of acoustic recordings from habitat where the fig parrot formerly occurred, including some lowland sites. At the time, there was some talk about them building an acoustic recognizer, which is basically like the AI stuff I was talking about before, go through the massive data set and pick things out. The northern subspecies of the fig parrots, which are still around, have a super distinctive call. There's no known recording of coxswains, but presumably it would be similar. And I assume they were building the recognizer based on the calls of the northern subspecies. And I basically said, hey, do you guys want this data set to run the recognizer through? Never got back to me. So don't know what's going on with that.
That's a shame.
But yeah, to answer your question, presumably if you've got coxswain's fig parrot in your backyard and the recorder picks them up, you'll have the best evidence that anyone has had in 50 years of this species being extant. So go for it.
That'd be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Meryl's asking, do lyrebirds have their own call, or do they always?
Yeah, they do. So they're really well known for mimicry, but they do incorporate their own kind of stanza within the mimicry. And the recording I played before, I'm not sure how well you guys could hear it. I'm not sure if it was actually playing through.
It wasn't as loud as possibly it should have been, but it's...
Yeah, I think what's probably happening is it's playing off my computer and then my microphone is getting it, and that's what you're hearing. So to listen to it properly, just go into the chat after the meeting and double click that and have a listen with headphones if you've got them, because that'll be the best. But I'll just play you Albert's lyrebird. So they're really restricted to that Gondwana rainforest area where I was doing my PhD. This is their, where's my microphone in here? This is their song. So that kind of like loud variable whistling, now it's mimicking king parrot, then log runner, king parrot again. And that kind of like, that's its own song. So They also do some really,
Mind-blowing. It's
really
mind-blowing that you
weird
can
stuff.
identify all those different ones within one song.
Yeah, it's funny. Hey, like when I was doing my thesis and listening to all the recordings, I had this idea of writing a paper about all the birds that did mimicry within the rainforest. And I gave up in the end because basically everything does. Like most of the songbirds, so silver eyes, scrub wrens, the lyrebird, obviously. What else? Whistlers, thornbills, magpies, butcherbirds. Like a lot of species do mimicry. And when you get more experienced, like even in that recording is pretty obvious because it's just like a lyrebird that then sounds like a king parrot that then sounds like a lyrebird. But if you're listening to the soundscape kind of recordings that I was taking, I was able to tell when, for example, it was a lyrebird doing a king parrot, because typically it's way louder than king parrot. It's slightly more variable and like liquid in tone, I would say. And it's often interspersed with their own song, but yeah, they do have their own song, which is pretty distinctive.
Which is leading me to a possibility in my head of it that a lot of researchers have misinterpreted this to actually be a king parrot in the environment potentially.
Potentially, yeah. And that's a challenge for the AI tools. Basically, if there's a species capable of doing like bang on mimicry, it's difficult to separate. But I mean, it's going to be overwhelmed by the amount of data that you get anyway. Like there are going to be some sites where king parrots don't occur, but lyrebird do, but whatever. I mean, if you're getting terabytes of data every year, doesn't matter. It'll just get squashed.
Spencer saying he heard a glossy mimic call by a superb lyrebird in Durango.
Yeah, cool. Yeah,
that's interesting. And he also says to you, David, that you'll have 3 million birders, including Spencer, in your backyard if you find the parrot.
yeah. Yeah. If you get Coxon's fig parrot, prepare yourself.
Yeah, prepare yourself for the onslaught.
The interest will be high.
Yeah, absolutely. We've probably got time for one more question, if anyone's got one.
Great.
No, that was pretty easy.
Here's another one.
Have
Do
we
you
got
use bird boxes? You mean like nest boxes? I'm assuming that's what.
Nest boxes, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I do. I'm not lucky enough yet to live on a big forest block, but that's my intention. And yeah, I've made quite a few of them. Usually I make them from salvage timber. So like when they smash down some old house in my suburb, I'll go and check it out and see if there's any fascia board or anything nice. Old hardwood is best. And then, yeah, process the wood and make boxes. There's a really, really good website for this called Nestbox Tales. I think it's on Facebook. They've got a fantastic PDF with plans and designs for maybe 50 to 60 species. Might be more now. So yeah, I do use them. I've used them in a work context as well. So at an offset site that my old company was responsible for, we put up lots of boxes for greater glider, which were occupied quickly, and the gliders started breeding in them almost straight away. So that was rewarding. But yeah, I do use them. Did you have any?
Yeah, I do, because a friend and I were going to make some, and we're given some formwork timber from a concreter. And
yeah.
told by the owners of hollow log homes that there's high odor timber and low odor timber, and you can't use the high odor timber.
Okay.
And formwork apparently is high odor.
Not sure what the odor would be, but presumably it's like some kind of treatment that they would use. So people recommend that you use hardwood if you can, but it's obviously way more expensive. Marine ply is another option, which is slightly less expensive. But if Hollow Log Homes say don't use it, I would trust them. They've got way more experience in it than I do.
Yeah, that formwork is marine ply and it's got a black coating on it, and that's
Oh, yeah.
what they might be referring to.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm not sure. Essentially, you don't want something that, because lots of parrots and other things, squirrel gliders, sugar gliders, they'll chew around the entrance hole, they'll chew the inside of the box. And if there are any chemicals that whatever the plywood's been treated with, or any harmful glues or paint or whatever, then it's probably not a good outcome. Whether it would actually lead to them dying or not is another question, but yeah, you just want to avoid it, minimize it if you can.
Yeah. And also I've got a pale-headed rosella nest box that's used constantly 12 months of the year by 3 pairs. One pair have
Fantastic.
but one pair have unfertilized eggs all the time, and they irritate the other 2 pairs because they want to use it. But the problem was, for a while there, I was losing babies because of a red mite.
Oh, yuck.
I was told it affects the babies but doesn't affect the adults.
Yeah, okay.
And so I treated the bark chips that was putting in there.
Yep.
And it takes a while for the pairs to get used to the smell, I think. But
Yeah.
I contacted National Parks about it, but they never got back to me.
Yeah, that's not surprising. They're pretty under-resourced, the poor buggers, but I know you could try having a look. So the guys doing the Swift Parrot nest box program in Tassie, they have been using some kind of pyrethrin or other insecticide treatment for the material in the bottom of the boxes, because they were having a similar problem of feather mites and whatnot, compromising the health of the nestlings. So maybe try and find those papers, see what they used. I'm sure it would have just been a commercially available thing.
Yeah, get a red mite powder.
Hmm.
The birds take a long time now to get used to the smell, I think, and they take ages before they decide that, I'm going to lay eggs.
Have you ever cleaned the nest box out?
I do every time the fledglings leave.
Yeah, the only other thing I would suggest is if you've got 3 pairs and they're all kind of like competing for the box, get a couple more.
Yes, put them even side by side.
That's when we found out about the low odor and the high odor, and
but yeah, hopefully they do get used to it and it works, because it's horrific seeing, like, sometimes when you see chicks coming out of boxes or even just nests, like they're just absolutely covered in mites. They're just stuck, like they can't get out, they can't fly yet, they're just getting smashed by them. So
I've got a little car reversing camera in the box and a battery to run it, and you could see them all bouncing around with something that was irritating them, but we couldn't see until they died. Red mites.
Nasty stuff. But yeah, I think treating the nesting material within the box might help. I don't know what else you could do really, because you don't want to, like, once they're in there, you don't want to go playing around with them too much because the parents might abandon them anyway. Just having some kind of insecticide in the nesting material would be beneficial, I think.
All right, guys, we're going to have to wrap things up because we've gone just a little over time. I would like to thank you, Elliot, for an incredible talk. I've learned so much more than I ever imagined. So thank you.
No worries.
So much. I'm not going to be able to come on your walk at the planting because I'm actually at another event in Brisbane the day before. So I'll just Sunday. But hopefully I'll see you there. Will you be there the whole week?
No. So I'm basically just twitching the walk essentially. I'll be there for the walk and a bit afterwards, but I'm not camping or anything this time.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, they announced it a bit late for all of us with other things going on, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been an absolute delight to see all of you. We have this talk, as I said, every single month on the 10th of every month, and we have a different speaker every time. So I'm hoping you guys would like to join me. But first, let's give Elliot a big either pretend or a real round of applause. You've done an awesome job. If anyone would like to join us next time, or if you know friends that would like to have seen Elliot's talk but didn't get to it, then I suggest you follow along with one of my social things, and you'll be able to see the video of this talk on YouTube, which will be up in a couple of days. So thank you everybody for being here. Thanks once again to Elliot. You guys are awesome. See you soon.